hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today.
On December 8th, 1980, Mark David Chapman shot and killed John Lennon, co-frontman of the Beatles, as Lennon returned to his apartment in New York City. When the NYPD arrived at the famous Dakota Apartments to arrest Chapman, Chapman was standing over Lennon's body reading The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. When in custody, Chapman stated that the big part of him is Holden Caulfield, who is the main person in the book. The small part must be the devil. So, what is this book? Is it dangerous to read? Why did it inspire the murder of one of the most successful songwriters and performers in human history? Who is Holden Caulfield? Would he have done the same? Over this video series, we'll look at religion, education, innocence, and some various cultural reference points as the keys to understanding The Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield, and the murder of John Lennon. Today will be a broad scope introduction of characters and important plot points. You will see clips from various movies. The characters depicted might share some qualities with ones in The Catcher in the Rye, but they are ultimately just stand-ins, as there is no movie nor much artwork about the book. Let's dive in. In the broadest terms possible, let's first discuss what generally happens in the book. Catcher in the Rye begins in the fictional town of Agerstown, Pennsylvania. The entire book takes place in the 3 days between Holden Caulfield's expulsion from Pensy Prep and his reconciliation with his sister in his hometown of New York City. We start on a December Saturday in Agerstown, meeting Holden's friends, Ackley and Stradlater. We are also introduced to Jane, a love interest of Holden's, who continues to pop up throughout the novel. Before leaving Pensy, Holden meets with one of his teachers, Mr. Spencer. This interaction will serve our understanding of Holden in later videos. From Agerstown, Holden goes to New York City with the money he has. He enjoys his time alone before confronting reality and confessing his expulsion to his parents. In NYC, we meet Phoebe, Holden's little sister, and Mr. Antolini, another former teacher of Holden's, who we will discuss more later. There are other minor characters we will discuss, but to introduce the rest of Holden's family, we have DB, an older brother who is writing screenplays in California, and Allie, a younger brother who died of leukemia. To set the stage, we have to talk a bit about J.D. Salinger's life. This novel was published in 1951 after the end of World War II. Salinger developed the main character, Holden Caulfield, as he fought in some of the bloodiest and most infamous battles of World War II, including the invasion of Normandy and the Battle of the Bulge. He kept a small pocketbook in which he interpreted the horrifying tragedies he experienced in Europe from 1942 to 1945. Coming home from the war and adjusting to life in his hometown of New York City, Salinger then pieced together the characters and storyline he had developed as a soldier. For these reasons, The Catcher in the Rye is seen as a post-war novel with real battlefront experience, and all of this turbulence is hidden in the subconscious of Holden as we are guided through his thoughts. So imagine yourself, 17 years old, before the internet or even commercial aviation was a thing. A European dictator very nearly just took over the world. Communism is spreading its influence from the mighty Soviet Union, and the first atomic bomb was just dropped in Japan. The whole world seems to be smoldering as America takes hold of world superpower status. Droves of young men are returning to America with a completely different sense of reality, one animated with nightmarish cynicism. This is the world of Holden Caulfield, and just what J.D. Salinger himself experienced. It is interesting that instead of writing a war novel or anything depicting violence, Salinger shows us the inner world of a young man who is subject to the times. This demonstrates the psychological impacts of war and how they stretch far beyond those involved on the battlefield. Therefore, entering the mind of Holden is the way to understand J.D. Salinger's motivations and the prevalent themes in the novel. So, the first thing we have to do to understand these events is to understand Holden. Holden, presumably from a well-to-do middle-class family, has just failed out of his boarding school at age 16. For most of the book, he is alone, between one-off interactions with people he doesn't seem to like very much. What we learn about Holden is what one would learn through an intensive series of psychotherapy sessions, which is entirely sensible because the whole narrative is an exchange that occurs at a hospital after Holden gets tuberculosis and recuperates on the West Coast with his brother DB. But the point is that we're getting the whole story from Holden, and there are many times when we see that his perspective on things may be skewed. We can wonder if we're getting the whole truth, or perhaps a distortion of it, but really, what the book is giving us is Holden. Through Holden's recounting of events, we see how his inner world interacts with his statements and actions. We begin to get a sense of why Holden is having such a hard time and empathize with his struggle. This establishes a connection between Holden and the reader, encouraging empathy as an antidote to the type of sorrow Holden feels. By introducing us to Holden through psychotherapy sessions, Salinger forces us to examine Holden's sorrow and see what we might have in common with him, or what we might need to work on. I don't know about you, but I find it easier to live with myself after living in Holden's mind. Though highly perceptive, Holden doesn't understand others' feelings very well. In other words, he lacks empathy, which is in part why he feels so lonely. He complains about and criticizes everything around him. The main enemy in his mind are phonies and phoniness everywhere he turns. One would think that Holden is the only authentic person in the whole story, but we know this can't be true. Holden is just young and troubled, and he hasn't yet built up his own empathy muscles, which is why he feels so isolated. Empathy, World War II, tuberculosis, what does all this have to do with Mark David Chapman and the shooting of John Lennon? Chapman was obsessed with the book, finding meaning in the story after dropping out of college and living a vagrant lifestyle with many short-lived jobs. As he became more and more unstable and depressed, he signed at least one of his letters as The Catcher in the Rye, signifying an alignment with the book's protagonist, Holden Caulfield. In the months before confronting Lennon, Chapman is clearly feeling very isolated, perhaps lending to his connection with Holden Caulfield. He has a short list of people he would like to kill. On the list are Ronald Reagan, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and Johnny Carson. But he chooses Lennon because Lennon has gotten so wealthy making music about living simply and ending poverty. This activity embodied the, quote, anti-phoniness in which Chapman said he was living. Well, what would Holden have thought of this interpretation? Did Salinger write a disturbed book that is dangerous to read? These are important questions, but we just don't have time for them in this video. We have only just scratched the surface in understanding The Catcher in the Rye. Next time, we'll take a closer look at who Holden Caulfield is and the nature of the latent power that caused such a violent reaction to this book.